Well, hello, that's me again. Today is December 7th, 2023. And for those who are historically challenged, keep in mind it was a very important date in 1941, the date which will live in infamy. Sadly, after the Pearl Harbor and after the war concluded with United States, especially Navy, brilliant victory in the Pacific War, very few people took their lessons to heart. And they learned absolutely nothing politically wise, and we will be talking about this today. And let's start with the issue which is, if you know me, what I do for living, including what I write about, I always look at what is called drivers, what drives things, or, well, people say in the layman's lingo, what make one or another person click, if you wish. So I'm interested in what makes one or another country click. And so let's start with, so to speak, going to our goals, and I want to show you, basically quote for you, Senator J. William Fulbright, who in 1966, in The Arrogance of Power, wrote this about the United States. It is simply not necessary for us to go around forever proclaiming, I am the greatest. The more one does this sort of thing, in fact, the more people doubt it. It is a very profound statement because it is also very, very correct. Then you saw yourself, for example, 2 days ago, how Russia was isolated after Mr. Putin and his incredible, escort of people, from Russian government visiting United Arab Emirates on Saudi Arabia, and how they have been treated there as their highest possible honors. And that we'll leave for other time to discuss it. But I introduced the Fulbright quote on the reason, for the reason, and just to show you. No sanitary concerns here, as Daily Mail writes. Putin warmly shakes official hands as he arrives in UAE after bizarrely refusing to step within 70 feet of British ambassador at Kremlin event for health reasons. Well, you know what? It is a protocol and diplomacy language, which in this particular case goes, to saying politely, go screw yourself, because Russia is not interested in Britain, or for that matter on the United States, in any serious sense, other than the fact that United States represents, of course, the danger not only to the world but to themselves also, considering the fact what is happening in the United States right now politically, which is absolute political circus, and the country which is being driven now into the ground. And I warned about this for years. Many people did, actually. And if you take a look even at this news, that actually basically there we have the situation when the industrial production is being down for 13 months now. And what can you say? I mean, just read this. I mean, how can I explain this? That oil demand will take a hit from yet another decline in U.S. manufacturing. And here they report, as you can see yourself yesterday, U.S. manufacturing activity has declined for the 13th consecutive month, making this an unusually lengthy downturn. The Manufacturing Purchasing Manager Index by the Institute for Supply Management clocked in at 46.7, 14th percentile for all months since 1980. In November 2023, marking the 13th straight month, the index has dipped below 50-point threshold since November 2022. We do not need to elaborate on this, because anybody who has the IQ above room temperature, we know what is happening to American economy. Nobody in their own mind looks at, the stock market, it goes up, down, up, down. It's just like speculation, bubbles of non-existent money, of non-existing capitalizations, whatever that means of their companies. And mostly this is all virtual economy. But yet they make conclusion based on that. And that leads, obviously, to the situation which is now becomes acrimony. And a bunch of the sanctimonious people, I mean, including, for example, Mark Milley, who dreams about, cutting throats of Russian servicemen, they have to face now a catastrophic military defeat. Nobody wants to have their name associated with that. Paulus' army, Sixth Army, and it was more than the Sixth Army, a bunch of other Axis armies, Italian, Hungarian, Romanian, and elements of the Fourth Army, which have been completely destroyed at the Battle of Stalingrad. Paulus' name today, not only just as the author of the Barbarossa, it is about the German Field Marshal who lost the crucial battle not only in the World War II, but historically. And nobody wants to be associated with this. And when you look at what is happening in terms of the special military operation, you have now those, people like even Mr. Pistorius, who is the basically Minister of Defense of Germany, and he is nothing but the America's lapdog. He will do, United States tells him to jump, he asks how high. And yet suddenly, yesterday, he talks to Ukraine, and he tells them that we deliver what we can. The same applies to almost all the other allies and partners, he said, adding that Germany is not an ally of Ukraine and therefore not in an alliance. Why do you think so he said that? Well, let's start taking a look at some headlines which which describe the situation happening at the front lines. BBC, British BS Corporation, which is the really not a good source of any kind of truthful information, as you would expect from any British media. But here it is. On the 3rd of December, they suddenly get some kind of the Ukrainian, whatever he is, soldier, whoever he is, soldier, officer, and soldier tells BBC of frontline hell about this whole situation on the front lines in this particular case, Kherson region, and he talks about this bridge. I continue to laugh when I read those things. And he's talking about this crossing of Dnieper and taking this so-called bridgehead at Krinky village. And here he talks about outnumbered and outgunned, one frontline soldier has given a sobering account of Ukraine struggling to cling on to its foothold on the east bank of the vast Dnipro River. And they talk about there several hundred Ukrainian soldiers. Okay, so we have several hundred Ukrainian soldiers, and they discuss, that's what they discuss. They basically give the quotations or quote the guy from there. And here what he says. We thought that after we made it there, the enemy would flee, and then we could calmly transport everything we needed, but it didn't turn out that way. When we arrived on the eastern bank, the enemy were waiting. Russians we managed to capture said their forces were tipped off. First, you already can say that actually tipped off by who? Well, let me explain. Evidently, people have to understand what ISR is. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and Russians have 24/7 situational and tactical awareness along the whole front line, because Russians control pretty much every single movement of the Ukrainian units and formations. But here is the key phrase which explains to you what I will be talking about today. Look what he says. We thought after we made it, the enemy would flee. And then we would calmly transport everything we needed. Why does he say that? Considering the fact that, well, who knows, BBC might have made it up. But, I mean, probably, let's say, he's the real guy. Why does he say that Russians would flee? I can tell you why he says that. The reason he says that is because he was told so. He was told so not just by the armed forces of Ukraine, be conscious, although they did this too. He was told so by American and British guys who planned this whole counteroffensive. And this is what's the point today of this whole situation. So, to demonstrate to you what Krinky, where they landed is, here it is. This is the Krinky village. As you can see yourself, the scale is 1,000 feet. So you look attentively at, you look here at about 1 mile, slightly more than 1 mile in length. Well, basically swampy place. And as you can see yourself, the shortest distance you can cover in his case over Dnieper River is 2,181 feet or 665 meters. So what you have, you transport those guys, because this was planned by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because they think that if you do amphibious operations, you will succeed. They are one-trick ponies, but here it is. You get those guys, you get them on this swampy, basically shore, and then suddenly they recognize that, oh, Russians are not fleeing. Wow. What are you gonna do? Well, you dig in and you are being killed by daily in huge numbers or wounded. Then you try to transport your wounded on the other shore, but no use. And the question is, in this case, why did they do that? Why do they throw, for example, right now, the battalion force, which half of it is either killed or wounded, why it is there? Oh, look at this. This was basically American and British plan. You see this Krinky thing? And I measured the distance to not just to Melitopol, but in this particular case to Armyansk, which is the main entry point to Crimea. It is 83 kilometers, or 51 miles. They thought that, my gosh, this operation, as they call it, that basically means operation of killing as many of your own troops as possible. You will throw them on that, basically, shore, under Russian artillery, gunships, and drones. But with this pathetic idea that you might develop the bridgehead from which you can march 51 miles across the open terrain. And you have to be really high to believe that this can happen, and you have to be completely, militarily incompetent to even have, ideas like this. This is why Russians are openly now laughing at all that, and especially when you consider the fact that Russians were not just tipped off. Russians know every single move. And then, of course, we suddenly get to this point. Foreign policy suddenly tells you, just 5 days ago, is this military capable of learning from the war in Ukraine? And they state that, in foreign policy, this is a very neocon rag, and actually they are very Russophobic, as a matter of fact. They hate Russian guts. And they state thing which is absolutely not true. The Pentagon has learned painful lessons in the past and may have to do so again. And once of their, and these are Rand people. These are the people who wrote this piece, and they write, these are the people who created a lot of the so-called analytical materials which helped the United States to lose all of its wars. But they still think that Pentagon is capable of learning. Learning what, you might say? Well, let me put it this way. I really don't even know how to approach it without laughing, or I don't know how else to explain it to. But here it is. This is more or less respectable publication. It is Modern War Institute at the West Point. And we have here David Klaus, who writes that war has changed. Well, war is always changing, and the Army's conceptualization of operational art must follow suit. And he writes that the rapid evolution of war, as Karl von Clausewitz described it, politics by other means, is reaching a point where soldiers no longer have a monopoly on war, as two People's Liberation Army colonels wrote in the late 1990s in their book Unrestricted Warfare. And they predicted that the boundaries lying between the two worlds of war and non-war, of military and non-military, will be totally destroyed. Well, that is just fine, and I really appreciate what Chinese colonels wrote about it. But the problem is, this is all repetition or multiplication of the warfare essences, which Marxists, none other than Marxists, starting from Lenin and the other people who follow suit, they described it as in very simple terms. There's no war and non-war. There is a conflict. And there is a conflict which is non-military conflict and the armed conflict, which is war. So why do you have to go and repeat this war, non-war iteration of the same thing, which actually explains the state of the humanity? Sadly, we are violent animals, we humans, and we always in some sort of the conflict. But it is also the conflict which moves our civilization ahead. So it's not necessarily always bad, but here it is. And here is David Klaus writes that there have been a few important voices calling for change. And he mentions here General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, seems to recognize the blurring of the boundaries between war and non-war, and evolving battlefield with the soldier is not the primary participant. In February, he signed the joint concept for competing. And this is where I get myself, face palm, and you know what? If you go to Mark Milley's paper, he signed it. He wrote a number of things, including in parameters. But here's this joint concept for competing. 10 February 2023. You can download it if you want to. Hey, I didn't even bother to look on it. I just looked at the abstract and summary, and guess what it was? Same old in terms of the iteration of the armed conflict and just a regular conflict, be that economic or any kind of conflict. You know what? Once in a while I have conflict with my wife, and once in a while I have conflict with my children. We live in the conflict. We thrive in the conflict as humans, and we want to limit armed conflict as much as possible. But guess what? Guess how Mark Milley starts with? Here it is. Recognizing the overwhelming conventional military capability demonstrated during Operation Desert Storm in 1991 and Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, U.S. adversaries responded by seeking to circumvent U.S. deterrent posture through competitive activity below the threshold of armed conflict with the United States. And here comes the quote from Fulbright. Until the United States considers the conflict in the Desert Storm in 1991 as the super-pooper event in the military science, United States will continue to lose its wars. The litmus test is Army, which venerates General Patton as the great armor general, also has issues with understanding of the warfare. It also has issues with understanding military history of the World War II. Not to speak about the scope and scale of what was happening on the Eastern Front, and rather, let's be honest, fairly timid actions on the Western Front by the time when Wehrmacht already didn't exist as the first-rate force. But they continue to do this. And here comes the most important thing. When you look at this basically constant discussion and Mark Milley, just going out, on a limb and, describing how you can compete, which is like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's the same paper which was written many times before, and it's the basically multiplication of the essences. You have to understand that Mark Milley and Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it is in the open now, were the ones who planned the so-called counter-offensive. Mark Milley is one of the biggest losers in the warfare, not only in the 21st century, but also in the 20th century. How do you think Mark Milley wants to be remembered? I can tell you how he will be remembered. He will be remembered as the guy who killed, for no apparent reason, hundreds of thousands of the Ukrainian troops, not even penetrating, not even reaching the first line of defense of Russian army. This is the level, professional level, or rather lack thereof, of the American strategic and operational planning. And here's the guy and his cohort of his evidently peers who from London especially. I don't know how British military even factors here. Those guys would be allowed, all their top generals wouldn't be allowed to run the freaking platoon or company in Russian military. And so here we are. Here's the guy who planned that. Here's the guy whose name has the stamp on it. And now we have the acrimony and sanctimonious elaborations, how Mark Milley wanted to cut throats of Russians. Of course he wanted to, because he knew that he is not good. Compare him to Valery Gerasimov, who doesn't appear anywhere in public, except for the rare appearances in some there, fleeting footage when, Russians report about the war. Guess what? The guy doesn't talk. He does. And guess what? Mark Milley and Gerasimov, these are two different weight categories. So, United States not having general staff and everything which is associated in terms of the operational planning and development of the strategies is simply not in the same league. And this is what happens now. This is why they are suffering right now, because the war is over effectively right now. The only thing which is happening now along the whole front line is formalization of what kind of the articles of the unconditional surrender Russia will show Ukraine, or whatever will be left of it. And that means what? Catastrophic failure of NATO, of the combined West. And Mark Milley was the guy who actually precipitated it. He accelerated it very fast. The reason being that, well, they do not know what real planning is in Pentagon. They don't understand what real war is. And that brings us to this fundamental phrase which I pointed out just 10 minutes ago when I was talking about the quotations from this allegedly Ukrainian soldier, that Russians should flee. Guess what? That's what they thought. That's what they thought in Pentagon. They really instilled that belief that, oh, we give you this super duper pooper technology since 2014. We train you in accordance to NATO and American combat manuals. You guys gonna win all of it. And that's why the Washington Post article was so important, because it touched on the most important thing, which is key in understanding this conflict. That is why, for example, I was procrastinating with writing my book. Only recently I started to write it in earnest. They really believed it. Many of them did, at least. So Mark Milley really believed it, that they can do it, because he thought, well, yeah, Russian soldiers are nobodies, So, yeah, the country which for 1,000 years defined enemies which Mark Milley can only dream about of becoming, well, yeah, those soldiers will flee because they will see what? And when you look at this level of military incompetence and unprofessionalism, and this constant reference to this Gulf War, for crying out loud, you beat the 5-year-old kid in the sandbox, and they still think about it as some kind of event. It's not. Mark Milley has to go together with his Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they have to go back to school and learn the real history of the World War II. Learn how the Russian and Soviet general staff performed in it. Good that some people who have brains in the American military, they begin to read and reference, well, Tukhachevsky it's one thing, but they at least begin to read Russian strategists. They begin to reference them. They say, oh, that was Tukhachevsky's idea. Oh, that was Svechin's ideas. Yes, guys, because those guys were already proceeding from the incredible historic experience of fighting, losing, and winning wars. And then, of course, after the World War II, Soviet Union was completely destroyed. I mean, the infrastructure, everything. Yet, somehow it emerged as a superpower. You know why? Because this is what really matters. You come on to the table with the winning record. And at that time, nobody had any doubts who defeated Nazism. Today they do, and as I already stated, when you look at Mark Milley and what they write, what they produce, this yawn inspiring documents, you just yawn and you read this, big words, leverage, operational art, and it's on and on and on. It's nothing of substance, because this is the only way they can, because they do not have proper instruments to basically provide proper operational planning. You have to have instruments. You have to have the hardware. How you can explain it to the people, for example, from Pentagon, that U.S. Air Force is actually obsolete, largely obsolete. It's no match to the combination of what, say, Russian VKS, which is airspace forces, including their air defense, which they never encountered in their life. They will be shot down in hundreds without even know what happened to them when they will begin to, pretend that they can go and fight Russia. And this is not just all of it. And if you look attentively of what is happening right now with the whole collapse of the American strategy and operations and what have you, when it became clear that basically United States was much deeper involved into this whole catastrophe, collapse, you go and look at this very funny thing. So suddenly Poles, you have Polish minister, so UK special force operating in Ukraine. Yeah, sure, Russians knew about this. Yeah, SAS was operating in Ukraine. If you look at the guy with all tattoos here and, just his operational guy from British, well, probably SAS, the last thing, which actually works militarily, what's left in UK. And he says that elite British special forces were operating on the ground in Ukraine weeks after Russia invaded last year. That is the allegation contained in a new book, Poland at War, by Polish journalist Zbigniew Parafinovich. And I went out and look at this. Yeah, there is a book, Polska na wojnie, Poland and War. It came as a surprise to me. Poland was at war. Well, there were a lot of Polish volunteers and Polish cadre military who fought in Ukraine on Ukrainian side, especially like block units, like shooting in the backs of the retreating Ukrainian soldiers. But this is the first time I hear that Poland was at war. If Poland was at war with Russia, Poland won't last very long, and but yet here it is. Can you imagine? They are generalists, think that they were at war. Okay, hey, again, the definitions, the goalposts, they're moving all around constantly by NATO countries. But if that hasn't been enough, when you look at what you use as the data, for example, look at this. This is Yahoo News yesterday. General Staff of Armed Forces of Ukraine. Look what the numbers they give you. According to the report, Russia lost 5,618 tanks, 10,482 armored fighting vehicles, 10,561 vehicles and fuel tanks, 8,045 artillery systems, 990 multiple launch rocket systems, 605 air defense systems, 324 airplanes, 324 helicopters, drones, 22 ships and boats, and 1 submarine. And Russia also lost 336,230 troops. This is what, VSU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Staff, was also providing to Pentagon at some point of time. And they were believing this. That tells you actually about professional level. And CIA evidently also believed that that's why they believe that Russian troops will flee. But you cannot explain this to people. They are no good. They are really not good. And when you begin to look at what they did to the country, what they are doing to the country, I mean United States, guys, you have to choose your own league in terms of the proper management and governing of the country, let alone prosecuting the war. And as famous protagonist on the one of these movies, Cuba Gooding Jr. was screaming, "Show me the money! Show me the record! Mark Milley, Can he show the record of his, strategic vision? Not talking about the thing which he writes, which are, again, collection of the big words, of nothing, just meaningless, verbal diarrhea of all those leverages, operational art, operational planning, and strategy, and all that thing. Does he even understand that the United States lost their arms race? Just to give you an example, United States already spent $100 billion on developing hypersonic weapons, and it's still nowhere near to developing materials and command and control systems of those weapons. And if and when United States creates them, they will create the weapons which will be probably slightly above Mach 5, 6, and they will be of the aeroballistic variety, probably. So, and when you look at this together, you put this together, and you begin to understand why Mark Milley wants to cut Russian throats, or why Mr. Biden and Mr. Austin, who won't qualify to enter any military academy in Russia, they talk about that, oh yeah, the American troops will have to fight Russians if we do not provide aid to Ukraine. It doesn't matter, even if it provides the aid to Ukraine. It's over, guys. It's over. You cannot do anything about it. And if they want to really pretend that they can deploy or pre-deploy the force, I would say $1.5 million about that. They will need to deploy their US forces. I don't think so. They will have enough weapons to provide for them. But still, if they want to fight Russia in Ukraine or elsewhere, well, good luck with that. See what happens after that. And as I already stated, read parameters. Can United States sustain 3,600 casualties a day? I don't think so. It's going to last probably a couple of weeks, and after that it will be all over. But you cannot teach them the real war. And those common sense professionals who are still left in Pentagon or in elsewhere in the formations which are in the field elsewhere, it's too late. You cannot fix it. And they can continue to throw huge amount of money at that, but nothing gonna change the outcome of not just special military operation in Ukraine. It's already known to everything what have happened there. It doesn't change the trajectory of the combined West. And when you have military leaders like Mark Milley, who evidently doesn't understand what he was doing, this is everything you need to know. And as I already stated, go back to the war colleges and start learning real military art. And this is what I wanted to tell you today, guys, because this is extremely important, and I will be talking to you later on other things which, you cannot fit so much into the 30-35 minute session. And as always, guys, those who like what I do, please subscribe to my channel and support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee too. And what can I say? Have a nice rest of your week, and I'll talk to you later, guys. Bye-bye.